Okay, good. So I think we are fine.
Oh, Soumitra, great to
How are
see you.
you?
I'm fine. Thank you
Hello,
very
Jacques. How are
much.
you?
I am very well, Soumitra. Very pleased to be with you today, this morning.
Same here. It's
Thank you
my
very
pleasure
much.
also.
We have a term in Portuguese, they say saudades. I don't know if you are aware of this word.
I am.
There is no translation to other languages.
I know, I know. It's a very special word in Portuguese.
Yes. How is your
Okay.
daughter and wife?
My wife is very well. She sends her regards to you. And my daughter actually is well too. My daughter's getting married next month. So we all are going to India next Tuesday. So it's a big trip in the middle of.
Congratulations to your daughter.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Big,
thank
big,
you.
big issue. Big event.
Yeah.
Very happy. Well, I think you are on time and we can start our panel. We have now a
Can
very,
I share my
very,
screen? Is it possible to share my screen for presentation?
yes, they will allow you. The technical team is going to allow you.
Okay.
Just to make a brief introduction about our panel is about the Global Innovation Index and universities metrics. Our panelists will be Professor Soumitra Dutta from Cornell University and the coordinator of the creator and the coordinator of the Global Innovation Index. Soumitra is a very recognized scholar in the area of innovation. He has been doing the research on the Global Innovation Index for several years. And I asked him to give us some insights about the Brazilian challenges in order to face these challenges presented by the Global Innovation Index. Soumitra is also worked for over 20 years at INSEAD, and then he moved to be the founding dean of the S.C. Johnson School of Business of the Cornell University. It's also a honor to receive with us Professor Jacques Marcovitch. Professor Jacques Marcovitch is a former rector, a former president of the University of São Paulo. Professor Jacques Marcovitch is one of the founding researchers in the area of innovation and entrepreneurship in Brazil. He has been doing this kind of research for some decades, an amazing track record of publications and books. And nowadays, besides his work on entrepreneurship and innovation, he's also carrying out a comprehensive research about universities metrics. And also, we asked the Professor Jacques Marcovitch to share with us the main findings of the research and the challenges it presents for Brazilian universities. So, given this brief introduction, I'd like to give the room to Professor Soumitra Dutta right now. Thank you, Soumitra, for coming to join with us.
No, thank you very much, Moacir. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and with Jacques. So, Jacques, good to see you too, and glad to share this panel with you. It's a very special time that we are living through right now with the COVID pandemic, and I certainly hope that all of us, including the panel members and the attendees, are keeping ourselves and our families safe and healthy during this very special period. This is also a very special period because we are seeing a number of changes in the world around us. Earlier, I was taking part in a meeting of the World Economic Forum, and the consensus view really out there was that this is a moment for change. This is really a moment for change that has been somehow thrust upon the world at the same time by the global pandemic. And of course, digitalization and innovation are right up there on the agenda, very high on the agenda. If you think about the vaccine process, the whole process by which the vaccine was created, that's a wonderful example of how the whole pharmaceutical research process, how the whole federal approval processes for vaccines have innovated to allow for that rapid pace of development. So the number of areas of education, of business, where learning from home, work from home is changing things dramatically. So we are really in a very important moment of change. I think we will look back at this moment in history 5-10 years from now and say that, well, there was a tipping point in 2020. clearly had some very unfortunate consequences with a number of deaths of unwanted, let's say, deaths and of many of our dear citizen colleagues and other people. But I think it also, like any crisis, has a silver lining. The silver lining is this has also brought upon us great innovation and change. Now, I have a set of slides which I would like to share with you all if it is possible, but I see that my screen sharing is disabled. Is it possible to enable my screen sharing? If not, I will just speak without slides. I can do either one. Okay, if the screen sharing is possible, please send me a message. But if not, I will just continue with my presentation without the slides. So a lot of my comments today is going to be based on two bodies of research that I've been involved in for more than a decade. The first body of research is something that I started with the World Economic Forum many years ago on technology competitiveness, and Jacques knows that very well. We published the Network Readiness Index for many years at the forum, and that was an index looking at technology and its role of technology in the development and competitiveness of societies. Some years ago, I started another index called the Global Innovation Index with the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, in Geneva. And that has become a very widely used index in global innovation, used by many countries, including in Brazil, where in fact CNI and SEBRAE are important partners of the research. I thank them for their partnership. And also the government of Brazil and also the industry through the May initiative is using the GII research quite extensively. So based on these two bodies of research, the first comment I'd like to make is that...
Soumitra, sorry for disturbing, but I think you are already allowed to share this screen.
Okay, good. So I will share my screen right now. And I think you should be able to see my screen. Okay, good. So I even did the translation in Portuguese of my slides. So I'm happy I'm able to show it. So these are the two reports that I mentioned earlier, and the Network Readiness Index and the Global Innovation Index. The links are mentioned below the pictures out there. I encourage you to look at the links and to download the reports and look at the data. It's all available for free. So I wanted to sort of make these four major comments. The first one is that technology today has become an important driver for competitiveness and for innovation. And the whole, let's say, impact of technology in terms of impacting the development of nations is not a new phenomena per se. We have many, many examples of countries whose economies have been transformed by technology. Finland, incidentally, is an economy that many of us forget 30 years ago was completely based on natural resources, like, for example, many parts of Brazil. Natural resources, forest products, rubber, timber were the main products of the economy of Finland. But then what happened was that the Soviet Union collapsed. The economy of Finland shrank by 25% in 3 years. And the country realized that it needed to change the direction completely. So there was a massive transformation in the economy of Finland done by a partnership between the leadership of the country, the private sector, academia, and other societal leaders. And the country today is completely different. It's a knowledge-based economy that is one of the leaders in the world. Similarly, you have Singapore. It's a small country with almost no resources except for its human resources and the geographical position it enjoys at the tip of the Malaysian Peninsula. And it has done extremely well by leveraging those kind of innovation and technology benefits that we talk about today. Israel, China, other examples of economic transformation based on technology and innovation. So what we see is that this kind of a story of technology driving change is something that we have seen across quite a few countries right now. And especially given this kind of a, let's say, movement towards innovation that we have seen accelerating in the digital space, I think we realize that now is a good time to rethink the country's investments in technology innovation. Now, one of the questions which is often asked is how will the innovation rates change in a post-COVID world? So we are seeing a vaccine on the horizon, and a vaccine, in fact, will probably emerge sometime soon. How will the innovation rates change in a post-COVID world? Now, it is useful to look at what happened after the last crisis. The last crisis was only about 12 years ago in 2008. And it is interesting to see that the innovation rates before and after have been a little bit interestingly different in patterns. So historically, the rates of investment in R&D, which was a rough proxy for innovation, always more or less paralleled the rate of growth of GDP. So as the economy grew, investment in innovation grew, R&D grew, and as it shrank, the same thing happened for R&D and innovation. Now, what you see is that after 2008, a very interesting pattern has emerged. So you see that the blue line, which is the total R&D growth, has been distinctly higher than the GDP growth rates. So in the last 10 years, last 12 years, the total R&D investment rates, the innovation rates have been higher than the GDP growth rate. There's a divergence out there. And this has happened despite the fact that many countries have reduced the investments in R&D because of fiscal crises. And what has happened is the private sector has picked up a lot of that investment in R&D. And that's the top line. The orange line on top is the business R&D growth. So what we have seen in the last 10, 12 years, and this is the data from the Global Innovation Index, is that the business sector, private sector, has stepped up its investment in innovation tremendously. Now, if you look at which sectors in the private sort of sectors invest the most in R&D and innovation, there are four sectors that actually invest the most. One is information technology, hardware and equipment. The second is pharmaceuticals. The third is automobiles. And the fourth is information technology, software and services. So if you look at these four sort of sectors, hardware, software services, pharmaceuticals, and automobiles, they in fact control or account for about 80%, 78% of global R&D private sector expenditure. So what it means is that an economy needs to have these sectors as a part of its economy to be able to see a high rate of R&D investments. If your economy does not have these sectors, you will probably not necessarily benefit from that high R&D investments that typically associated with these sectors. Now, you might also ask the question, what happens to other sectors that have suffered in the COVID environment, like, for example, travel, tourism, airlines, hotels, and so on. Now, these sectors will probably see a very painful transition. And it is quite likely that the survivors and the winners in the post-COVID environment in these sectors will be companies that will have to innovate quite tremendously, because you cannot keep on operating the same way as they did in the future. And a lot of the innovations, once again, will be technology-driven, technology-enabled. So it is quite likely that regardless of which sector you are in, what we are seeing most likely in the post-COVID environment will be a continuation of a continued high investment in R&D and innovation. And so the desire to actually continue to focus on that has to be strong in all economies. Now, if you look at Brazil, and this is the third point, is that in terms of Brazil's own positioning in the Global Innovation Index, I think there is a lot of room for improvement. It's good in many ways, but there's a lot of room for improvement out here. So I'll show you the Brazil's rank in both of the indices that we talk about. So one is the Network Readiness Index, where we look at essentially four different pillars. The basic idea of the Network Readiness Index is that you combine people and technology effectively to have the right impact on economy, on quality of life, and on the environment SDG goals. But to have this right impact, you need the right governance structure to bring people and technology together. You need to focus on trust, regulation, inclusion, and all the other elements that are very critical out there. Brazil is ranked 59th in amongst 134 countries. So as I said, a ranking which is good, but certainly can be improved further. If you look at Brazil's ranking on the 4 pillars of the NRI, which is technology, is ranked 69, people ranked 47, governance 53, and impact 69. So the strongest pillar for Brazil on the NRI is the people dimension, where you see a relatively good adoption of technology by individuals, businesses, and the government. And you see that in many Brazilian companies, which have been, in fact, leaders in technology adoption. Brazilian, for example, finance, the banking sector has been leader in adoption technology for a long time. Brazilian individuals have used social media actually extensively and so on. But there are lots of areas of improvement in the other dimensions that are mentioned out here. Now, if you look at the rankings of Brazil in the Global Innovation Index, what you see is that Brazil's ranking is similar to the NRI. It's 59 in NRI, 62 in GII. And Brazil's ranking has been sort of moderately improving, but not much in the last few years. Now, the issue in all these rankings, of course, is how do you compare with other countries? And one of the comments I wanted to make is that even though you might feel that Brazil is improving on technology innovation over the last few years, which is true, it is much more the rate of improvement as compared to others that matters in relative competitiveness. Because if other countries are improving faster than Brazil, then that potentially is a challenge for Brazilian industry and Brazilian organizations. Now, in the NRI, we have different pillars. So we have different elements of the model that compute the NRI. On the right-hand side, you have the various pillars, and you see on which pillars Brazil does better and which pillars Brazil does relatively less good. The strongest pillar for Brazil, as you see, is business sophistication. So once again, as I said earlier, Brazil is doing very well on the business aspects. Human capital research is also strong. And if you look at the weakness side, I think what you see is the market sophistication and institutions are the weakest points of Brazil. Now, all these measures are based on actual metrics. And I encourage you to go and look at the data more carefully if you'd like to be able to follow some of these analysis in more careful detail. Now, the last point that I would make is that there is a lot of room for improvement in Brazil. And if you think in terms of the basic areas for improvement, I think there are 4 broad areas that I would like to focus on. The first one is education. I think education is certainly critical. And I think this is where the work done by Jacques and others is very important. You have some great universities in Brazil, like USP, certainly, but there's room for further improvement in education. Certainly in the links that education has with industry. I think certainly what you find is that some economies like America, they are very good at building strong links between industry and education. You need the leadership and the ambition to be able to drive innovation and technology in a country. You don't see almost any country that is able to succeed in innovation and technology without a strong desire from the top of the country, leadership of the country, to make that a national priority. If you don't have a national strategy towards artificial intelligence, for example, if you don't have a national innovation plan, it's hard for the economy to actually make progress in them, because all these domains need a lot of coordination across multiple groups, multiple people to come together. You need to work on SMEs and small companies, medium-sized companies. This is very critical because small companies form the heart of the economy of any country. And you need to be able to drive innovation in small economies, small companies, to be able to get them to go up on the digital curve and to take benefits from all the different possibilities of digital economy and digital technologies. Now, for Brazil, biodiversity and sustainability are very important, because certainly with the Amazon region and other kinds of rich resources that Brazil has, I think Brazil can be a global champion in biodiversity and sustainability. Now, these elements are becoming extremely important for all of us in the world. And certainly Brazil is a leader, but can take a global leadership position in this amongst all nations. So this is an area where you can invest a lot. And what is important is that even in areas like agriculture, where Brazil is very strong, there should be more innovation happening in the digital agriculture aspect. I don't know how many of you know this, but a country like Israel, a small country like Israel, has many more digital agriculture startups than Brazil. And Israel is not an agriculture powerhouse by any means, but Israel is a technology powerhouse. But they have really used technology for trying to understand how can it be deployed for innovations in agriculture. Let's say, for example, the whole idea of drip irrigation. How do you use water very efficiently for growing in very dry areas? So Israel has been using technology very effectively for agriculture. And Brazil needs to use innovation technology as advantages for building a global leadership position in biodiversity and sustainability. And the last one really is about public policies and R&D investments. We know that R&D investments are very critical for Brazil, for any economy to innovate. And because a lot of the innovation will be driven by private sector, I think the rules and regulations need to be made more conducive for them. Also, the government is often a very important player in supporting innovation through, for example, its procurement policies. So the government policies for procurement, the government policy supporting innovation, the private sector policies regulating innovation, all of these can be actually increased to make this much more effective for Brazil as a whole. So I think those are the overall messages I want to give you. And I think, thank you very much, Moacir, for allowing me to make this presentation. And I will stop right now and hand the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Soumitra, for this very provocative and scientific presentation. I'm sure we are going to have good discussion after the two presentations. Now, I ask Professor Jacques Marcovitch to take the room. Thank you very much, Jacques, for coming joining with us. Jacques, seu microfone está fechado.
Can you hear me now, Moacir?
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, Moacir, for this opportunity. I would like to thank all the organizers. And I would like to mention the privilege to be here with Professor Soumitra Dutta. I think that the enlightening presentation that he just made, and not only giving us a global perspective, but also focusing on Brazil and some of the strength of Brazil in terms of tropical health, in terms of agriculture, in terms of biodiversity, the whole issue of renewable, where Brazil has been pioneering, like the ethanol program. I think that what Soumitra does is really to bring to us not only the global picture, but also our strengths and weaknesses and how we can build this new era as we will define it in a few minutes. Soumitra mentioned Israel, which is clearly one of the hubs of innovation, but maybe he can share with us also India as a hub of innovation. And not only what is happening in India, but also this Indian diaspora that came to the US and is so successful. And since he has been looking at the macro picture, I think that he can also share with us as a professor of management the values, the knowledge, the capabilities of the innovators. What we have in this event that Moacir so well designed are young innovators who are looking also for the international experience to find out how to build a better future. And so, Soumitra, if you can continue expanding your thoughts and inspiring us with your knowledge regarding those aspects. I think that the two index that you mentioned, the Network Readiness Index and also the Global Innovation Index, are always look at several dimensions And when we look at ranking, and I will begin explaining what we are doing at the State University of Sao Paulo and expanding this to private university and to the Federal University in the state of Sao Paulo, rankings are not verdicts. Rankings are a source of knowledge, and I would say much more to improve our self-knowledge about our institutions and how to respond to the challenge than seeing the ranking as a verdict that classify us each year in a certain sequence. So what Professor Moacir asked me to do was, in this context of extreme transformation, I'm talking about the four crises of 2020, I refer to the sanitary crisis, health, but also economic, social, political, and the geopolitical transformation. You are in the US at the present time, and you see how the polarized society is making sometimes difficult to implement public policies. And maybe a question that we can leave for the debate, where innovation prosper more, in polarized society or in more integrated societies? And today what we see is a technology promoting polarization instead of helping integration and more unity to build a better future. I think that when we remember what some of the historians did, like Arnold Toynbee, when he said that prosperous society are not the ones that are richer or prosperous, are the ones that can conceive dreams and transform dreams in project and projecting results. And this is the case of Singapore, Switzerland, Israel, small countries that are conscious of the cost of inaction. And this consciousness creates some unity to promote ambitious objectives. So what is the project that I was asked to describe? Well, it's an initiative that is funded by FAPESP. FAPESP today is recognized as an institution that favors the innovation ecosystem. This was an analysis that was published a few days ago. And what we can see is, taking into account your readiness index, that are some institutions like Johns Hopkins, like the Imperial College, that responded very quickly to the threats that society was facing. And so we have to learn from this institution and to find out how our universities, like USP, like Unicamp, like Unifesp, also responded through a long-term capability in terms of research to the demand of society. This project that I was asked to describe has basically two guidelines. First of all is to broaden the understanding of indicator and metrics. It's like taking your the index that you are curating, my dear Soumitra, and to understand the methodology, to understand how they are built, so we can understand how it works. And this will help the self-knowledge. It's not the result of the ranking that is the main contribution, is which were the metrics that were selected to build this international comparison. And the second is skills and abilities to identify the context and methodology for the analysis of academic performance by area of knowledge and institutional scope. Allow me to share with you 5 challenges that we are facing after this period of almost a year. I think I would consider a year, because you do remember, Soumitra, that in Davos on January the 23rd, there was already a small group where Moderna was part of it, discussing the vaccine. So I don't think that things began in March. By the beginning of January, there was a consciousness that we were going to face a major issue, a major sanitary issue, and Moderna with other partners were discussing this in Davos in January of 2020. Which are the 5 challenges that we are facing presently in terms of, let's say, the performance of universities, but to respond exactly to the challenge that you mentioned, when you mentioned that Brazil has room to improve? This is the constructive terms that you did use. The first challenge is how to move from university-centered metrics to society-centered metrics. In other words, We are used to explain how many theses, how many doctorate, how many students, how many faculty we have been helping to develop in a certain period of time. But what society expects, it's an impact on innovation and on productivity. The second challenge is how to improve the society-university articulation. How can we work together on major issues? And what the crisis, the health crisis provoked was a major interaction between society and university, as we can see in many, many cases during the period from March to now. The third challenge is how to advance in the establishment of data management units. When you explain to us the readiness index and the global innovation index, we have very few people that can understand exactly the granular aspect of those rankings. So we need to create in our university, in our institution, units that will go beyond the press release that the country receive or the institution receive from the generator of the ranking. Because obviously the ranking are in many cases business. This is not the case of WIPO, but in many rankings like the THE, like KS, we are talking about consulting companies. So what they will do is provide a press release that the journalist will nothing more that will disseminate through their newspaper. Now, we need to understand the granular aspect of those indicators. The fourth challenge is how to identify high potential groups for research collaboration. I will come back to this challenge. And finally, how to network university for the building up of the new era. In other way, how in the area that you just mentioned, like biodiversity, like health, like agriculture, how can we increase our critical mass so we can contribute in a significant way for the advancement of knowledge globally? Regarding the first challenge, as I mentioned, the metric centered on society, differently from the metric centered on university output, aim to highlight the answers given by the university to the needs and expectation of the community that maintains it, that maintains us. In this way, we seek to respond to demands such as public health, job and income generation, facing the environmental challenges. Society-centered indicators include, among others, impact on the value generated by the productivity of trained professionals, impact of company created by graduates, impact in terms of the employment and income generated by graduates, and direct and indirect impact of the university human and financial resources on its surrounding. And this obviously will include one of the topics that is a center of this meeting, which is innovation and startup. The second challenge has to do on how to improve the society-university articulation. This interaction of interfaces and partnership with external stakeholders expand the potential for generating social impact through research, teaching, and knowledge transfer. Likewise, an effective participation of society in university decision-making processes increases the l'adhesion of social agents to make the program and university projects institutionally viable. The third challenge has to do on how to advance in the establishment of data management units. In 2020, what we did was to organize a program to train our resources, human resources. We are talking about 100 multipliers that are being trained to understand academic performance and international comparisons. In order to consolidate the acquired knowledge and developed skills, plans were developed to improve the institutional skills of the participating universities. These concrete proposals for institutional development are the result of the intense dedication of those participants throughout 2020. And I can assure you, Professor Dutta, that the two indexes are part of our discussions. I'm talking about readiness and innovation. The fourth challenge is the identification of high potential groups for research collaboration. In research university based in Brazil and mainly in the state of Sao Paulo, there is a remarkable diversity of strength in areas that stand out for their global leadership. The key to its institutional recognition is scientific excellence. Analytical processes can identify areas with the potential to achieve academic excellence for research collaboration, focusing on emerging themes and funding opportunities. Now, the question here is how scientometrics approaches can help us to identify high potential groups so they can collaborate among themselves and make a difference in terms of the global environment. The fifth and last challenge is how to network university-based in Brazil, but mainly in the state of Sao Paulo, to build up what we call the new era. We are not heading to a new normal. We are really moving to an accelerated trend, but all this will take us to a new era very similar to the one that we learned about when we migrated from the 18th, 19th century to the 20th century, when we moved from agriculture to industry. Now we are moving from industry to the digital world, and where environmental consciousness is becoming increasingly present in our decision-making. So university can share their vision of the future's ambition and objective, promoting alliances and partnerships that result in strategic synergies. Such effort would enable the development of new skills, such as, for example, in data science, in nanotechnology, knowledge of great importance in the contemporary scene. In the international sphere, they stimulate the formation of networks, like the one that you lead, Professor Dutta, in the business environment. I'm talking about business school environment. And we have in Europe some example, like the European and the International Alliance of Research Universities, or the Russell Group in the UK. So to conclude, what we did argue is that combining the three crises, the 3 or 4 crises, health, economic, social, and political, those crises are confronting university at a time where the demands placed on by society have never been so higher, but at the same time, it's an opportunity to do the good. This will only be possible if higher education leaders focus on the values that tie our community together and ensure that these values are embedded in the search for excellence. The dialogue among universities in this project and in this process has been highly enriching. Sharing experience allows us to grow together and share solutions to the challenges we face. Because we share so many of these challenges, holding this dialogue across the continent, as we are doing it now this morning, would allow us to share solutions and future plans together and build the new era for a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for your very relevant presentation, very critical. I want to take advantage before waiting for some questions from the audience, but I want to take advantage of my position to ask you something. First to Soumitra. Soumitra, Brazil, I disagree with you when you say that Brazil is well ranked in some dimensions of the Global Innovation Index. I think Brazil is ranking pretty bad. And but there is a question there is always disturbing me. Brazil is consistently ranked as a top 10 GDP in the world for around 4 decades. So it means that being a rich country or having a rich GDP doesn't mean having a lot of innovation. It looks like we are still very based in commodities, and this kind of situation also creates what I like to call a vicious cycle. In other words, we have a rich country, large GDP based in commodities, but a very unequal country with a lot of social problems. My point is that I do believe that if we have more innovation, even in the creative value, in the agricultural value chains or the commodities value chains in general, can be of great value for Brazil. If you can make a comment, it would be great. But I'd like to make a provocation to Professor Jacques as well. Jacques, this conference is really about the science meeting business. The idea is putting together the science ecosystem and the business ecosystem. And doing that, looking at the synergies that can help the country to develop better products, more sustainable products, sustainable in the triple helix sense, and better economic results, better social results, lower impact in the environment. How do you see our position in Brazil nowadays compared with other countries when we talk about this meeting of sciences and business ecosystems?
So should I go first, Moacir, because your question was first addressed to me, if you allow me, Jacques. So, I am a great admirer of Brazil, Moacir, as you know, and Jacques, as you know. I've been to Brazil many, many times, and I love the country, love the people, great culture, great country, and tremendous potential. So a lot of good things going for Brazil. If I could afford to be a little bit critical, you invited me to be a little bit critical, bringing an outsider point of view. So I say this, my comments, with full humility and with full acknowledgement that obviously I don't know the country as well as you do, and the realities of living in any country that the local people always appreciate more. I think Brazil has two issues that need to be addressed. One is, I think Brazil has underinvested in digital technologies. And the way the world has moved in the last 30 years is that digital technologies have become more and more and more important. So had digital technologies not become that important, perhaps the impact would not have been that high. But today, really, digital technologies are everywhere, whether it's biology, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry, whether it's software services, banking. Digital technologies are really right out there at the forefront. So countries that invest more in digital technologies will in fact do better, I think. Brazil has, of course, local digital companies that are very good. You have Totus, you have Stefanini, and they're good companies. But Brazil does not really have a global technology leader. Okay, so I think what Brazil needs is companies that will lead with technology, and I think that's an important example. I think the only company that in high technology that is a global leader is Embraer. Okay, so Embraer, of course, is going through a tremendous amount of challenges right now with the whole airline industry in turmoil. But I think in some sense, Brazil needs to invest more in digital technologies, more innovation, more in R&D. That's the first point. The second point is a little bit more sensitive. So I say this with a little bit more caution at the same time when I go there to Brazil. Big countries have two kinds of attitudes. And I say this because I come from a big country myself. Okay, I come from India myself. Either they get very complacent, and very inward looking, or they are very positively, they want to change the world, influence the world, control the world. They have a desire to lead. Okay, so either you have complacency or a desire to lead. And I think you can place most big countries somewhere in that spectrum, and where your country. So America clearly has a desire to lead. Okay, look at America, there's a clear desire to lead that is very, 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 very clear. Similarly, China, even though it does not express it, explicitly, has a desire to lead, no question about it. Okay, so there is a desire to lead in China. Brazil, I feel, is much more complacent. Okay, and Brazil is much more happy with the way things are. So I think Brazil is a rich country. You all lead wonderful lives in general. Okay, at least the elite live wonderful lives. And I think there's a much higher degree of complacency that I sense coming from the outside looking at Brazil, and at least a lot of the Brazilian people that I interact with. The general sense of satisfaction with what you have. And I see this also because Brazil, does not show that sense of leadership even to lead Latin America, the natural place to lead Latin America. Okay, so forget about the world. You begin by leading Latin America, the region. Like China is leading in South China, the Southeast Asia is leading in that region. So Brazil does not have a desire to even lead, in the Latin America. Look at the issue of language. The whole Latin America speaks Spanish, and the amount of Spanish included in Brazil is limited. It's very limited. So, if you haven't even bothered to learn the language of the region, which is actually quite easy to do because Portuguese and Spanish are not that far away, so you can actually learn them relatively easily. It's not even that mindset is not there that we have to lead the region. It's like we have a big country, big market, we're happy. And so that sense of complacency is quite strong. So I think those are the two comments I would say is that I think you need to invest more in digital technologies. And as a country, a society, I think there needs to be more of a desire to lead globally.
Thank you, Soumitra. Two very important issues. Jacques, the room is yours.
Well, I have little to add to the excellent knowledge that our friend Dutta, Professor Dutta has on Brazil. What I will try is to bring a complementary perspective, looking at demography, geography, technology, and then the economy. And to see the type of social and economic deficit that Brazil has, we have to go back to the 70s. I mean, the Brazilian population in the 70s were 90 million inhabitants, 90 million inhabitants. Today, we are 210 in almost 5 decades. So in other words, the population of Brazil was multiplied more than 2 in just 50 years. And the difference between the 70s and 220 is that in the 70s, 1/3 was urban and 2/3 was rural. And today we are 2/3 urban and 1/3 rural. So we had an amazing demographic transformation, which is, I would say that what the generation that I belong did. We did a lot, but we didn't do enough, because clearly in education, in health, in justice, we have a deficit in Brazil. But those deficits are opportunities for the young generation. And this in some way answers your question, my dear Moacir, are the opportunities that innovators have to respond to those challenges. But then we go to the geography. And Soumitra mentioned the Amazon. I mean, our country is a continent, and we have such disparities between the North and the South that, and if you can look at our internet networks, they are almost on the extreme of Brazil. I mean, on the ocean, and then a little bit on the interior. But the North is still orphan of any safe and reliable internet infrastructure, which is a deficit, but it's an opportunity. I mean, how can we leapfrog and maybe using new technology to expand our internet network, our digital network? And Soumitra mentioned how we are still limited in investment in this area. And he mentioned Stefanini and other companies, which are doing a lot, but still they are not doing enough. The third and last topic is the issue of technology. And our technology is very much centered on the traditional area coming from the industry. But the leapfrogging to digital, as you well said, still is not done. So having described what were the last 50 years, I feel that here we have opportunities. And the science bees that Moacir and his colleagues are organizing is the right thing to do to make visible what in other countries is a ambition that is a collective ambition. Because when we look at the country that were cited, Switzerland, Israel, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, this idea of innovation as an engine is a priority for the countries, because this is the survival of the countries. In our case, we still are looking at the deficit that we have to fulfill. And clearly, if there are no initiatives coming bottom up, not top down, because the federal government at the present time mainly is looking at other issues. And the state governments are also very much imbibed with other priorities. Our political system is not so robust as we will see in other countries. And I would like to conclude to respond now to Moacir. I think that what we lack is more visibility to the good initiative. As you probably saw in FAPES beside this morning, there was the ranking of institutions that are enabling innovation ecosystems, but also a huge list of startups and a huge list of innovators. So how can we turn this more visible? And at the same time, how can we move from software to hardware? Clearly, we will have to require the help and the participation of our countries. But I think that what Professor Dutta is telling us, give more priority to the digital infrastructure. This will help us to turn education, health, and other service and banking more accessible to the have-not, and help to create a better cohesion inside our own society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. I received a question private here that okay, it's a very broad question, but it's a sensitive question as well. But I think that I can share with you. This question is about the commercial war, China, United States, and how this is going to affect the emerging markets like Brazil, India, and also what about the election of Joe Biden and what can you expect next? Okay, the conference about innovation and entrepreneurship, but I think this kind of issue affects all dimensions of society.
Yeah, I think, this is a very important question, at the same time, very important. It has an impact on innovation, no question about it, because, the presidential election, the presidential policies impact innovation in the country. And what happens in America impacts a lot of the world also. I think President Biden, in his own, he published an article in Foreign Affairs recently, which I recommend to read about. He says, why America should lead once again. And he lays out his agenda in that article very nicely. And in the agenda, it is very clear that the agenda vis-a-vis China is not changing. So the same agendas that President Trump basically followed will essentially continue vis-a-vis China. So this containment of technology, export to China, containment of technology IP with China will continue, and most likely China in response is ramping up its investments on independent technologies. And this is very critical because China today has become a very important player in many key areas of technology, for example, in AI, for example, in 5G. And it is actually quite hard for other nations. So let's say, what does Brazil do, and what does Europe do, and what does India do? Because these other nations are going to be stuck in between China and the US, and they're going to be increasingly asked to choose between the China and the US. And I think this is the direction in which a lot of the developments in technology are headed. I personally do not see the US and China going back on a close technology collaboration. That's not going to happen. And in the face of the fact that most technology companies today happen to come from China and America, I think other organizations will have to be innovative and creative, or have to find other solutions. So I can give you an example of India. For example, Jacques, you mentioned India earlier. India, as you know, also had some very successful IT sort of outsourcing companies. So they are very successful in that. But India does not really have a global digital
Soumitra is frozen for me. What about you, Jacques?
Okay, let me get in and
That
then we
entire
will.
country.
Sumitra?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
you
were
froze
cut off.
for 1
Please
minute,
go.
Soumitra.
Yeah. So what I was referring is that India has created this national biometric database called Aadhaar. They spent 8 years doing it, and today that is enabling a whole different approach to the digital economy. So the way, for example, the digital economy has appeared in US and China is essentially large private companies creating their walled gardens, so creating the spaces where they conduct their own transactions. India, in contrast, has had the government create this basis of the platform for basic identification, other processes of the digital economy. And on top of that, they are building an open architecture of APIs for banking, for education, for health, in which any company can actually access the central global database to conduct their electronic identification of the processes. So this is called the India Stack. It's actually something that I recommend you look at. It's called the India Stack of APIs. And that's a different way in which the country is approaching the digitalization of the economy. It's a much more bottom-up fashion, but it could not have succeeded without the government leadership. The government leadership was critical to make that central database happen. So I think typically in any other organization, any other country, you will have to think about either you go with a choice made by America or China, or you'll have to be creative in coming up with some choices of your own, like what India has done.
Thank you so much, Moacir, to follow up on what Soumitra just mentioned. Let's talk about government leadership in Brazil, and then let's move to your question regarding US and China, and where an intermediary country like Brazil with 210 million inhabitants, we don't have 1 billion, and so like India or like China. First of all, where is the government leadership? Soumitra, we have this government leadership in the state of Sao Paulo. I mean, the state of Sao Paulo with 40 million inhabitants has an innovation system. I mean, we have FAPESP, we have 6 public universities, we have private universities, we have the R&D labs. Embraer that you mentioned is in the state of Sao Paulo. So if we look at the 40 million inhabitants of the state of Sao Paulo and this economy, which represents something like 40% of the Brazilian economy, then we will see where innovation is happening. Obviously, when you take those indicators in terms of Brazil, they dilute. But I wish one day that you will have a ranking of the state of Sao Paulo in the Innovation Global Index and also in the Readiness Index. And then we will see where we are in that list. This will help us a lot. And if we can, in some way, create this way of measuring, this will help us a lot in the state of Sao Paulo. Regarding China and the US, we are an intermediary country. As an intermediary country that we export to China, we depend on the export of China, but also we have a lot of trade relation with the US. We have to dialogue with both countries. And if we could avoid this one or the other, we have always to try to avoid it. And if we can, through a talented diplomacy, not always, but we have talented diplomats, to help to explain to the US diplomacy, now with Joe Biden, is going to be much easier than with the previous situation, to explain our interest, because diplomacy is interest and values. Our values are a value of social integration. We have people coming from all the world. I mean, the diasporas that are in Brazil, we have the major Japanese community, German community, we have the Americans that came to Brazil. So we have to explain that we are a society that is extremely multicultural and that we live together in a harmonious way. So we have to explain to the US our values and our interest, and we have to explain to China our value and our interest, and how to have our own project, which is the Brazilian project to serve Latin America and to serve the rest of the world. This is the way to deal with a world that is polarizing. We don't have, and we should avoid to get on one side or the other. We should work with both sides and to help to build consensus. This is what we lack in the world today, is to hear everybody, to be allowed and to be available to hear all the sides and then to propose a consensus. This is the way I see it, Moacir, but I would strengthen the idea of looking at the state of Sao Paulo as an example that can be also interact like FAPESP does it with the Amazon, with the Northeast, with the South, helping to interact with other states in a way to build a better future.
Thank you, Jacques.
Can I respond a little bit to what Jacques said? Can I add to what Jacques said, Moacir? No, I think I agree with you, Jacques, completely. I think Sao Paulo is certainly a hotspot for innovation, and I think we can certainly compare. But then you would compare Sao Paulo to Silicon Valley.
Sure.
So the comparison would change. You not compare it to overall of US or of the US. So you'd compare it to Bangalore, you'd compare it to or specific sub-region. So I think that's a comparison we are making in the Innovation Index. We do some analysis at the city level, but we can improve that further. I had this issue of US-China leadership struggle actually concerns me a lot, because in our Global Innovation Index, what we find is that the most innovative countries are those that buy ideas the most and also sell ideas the most. Innovation is driven not by isolation. Innovation is driven by exchange. So you get ideas, you combine them with your own ideas, and you create new ideas that you sell to others. So, Korea, Japan, US, these countries, in fact, pay the highest royalties to other countries and also get the highest license fees for their own ideas. So what I'm concerned about is if, for example, the technology cooperation does not happen, we will have all kinds of problems with multiple standards and other kinds of issues. For example, what is happening right now is China is so far ahead in 5G. 5G is critical for deployment of many of the services. And China is already working on 6G, okay, as the 5G is being rolled out in China. And you see, even for an advanced economy like the US, it is extremely hard to catch up with the 5G gap that it has developed because it has chosen to not invest in that historically. So this gap is going to keep on increasing. And what could happen is that eventually US comes up with another standard for 5G or 6G. China has its own standards, like the before VHS Betamax issue, and you have two incompatible standards. And that is not good for anyone. So I think the issue of collaboration is very important in innovation. And my fear is that the race for global leadership that is emerging between China and the US is a lot of it is based in technology issues. So technology is critical for military strength, for cybersecurity, for industrial competitiveness, and so on. And both the countries realize that you have to be at the leading edge of technology to be able to sort of establish a leadership. So it's a big question that I see for innovation rates, and how will it actually affect or get affected by this race between the two countries?
Thank you. I will take one question. In reality, we are 8 minutes far away from the end of this panel. So I will take I try to summarize a question by Andrea Delius. And I ask you to answer the question and make your final comments simultaneously, please, because this is a very interesting question. Andrea is saying there, in some sense, this metric is measurement of innovation or metrics of universities impacted is a very controversial issue. So she's asking, what do you think is the future of this kind of metrics in the Global Innovation Index? What do you think is going to be a kind of evolution in the Global Innovation Index? And for Jacques, what can come next is in the university metrics?
So if you allow me to go and make a first comment on that, in management, there is a saying that if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. And I'm the first person to admit that the Global Innovation Index, the measurement is incomplete. There are lots of areas where we are able to find the right data, the right variables. And I think we keep on striving to improve it better. So I do believe that even though the Innovation Index measure is incomplete and in some ways not fully correct, it is the best measure that we have today. And having some good measure is better than having no measure. So that's the comment that I would make. And I think in terms of impact, the issue really is how do you take this metrics and convert that into action? Because having metrics and producing reports is interesting and useful, but not really impactful if you don't convert that into actual action. So what is very important is to be able to engage with the right stakeholders, in government and industry and so on, and work with them to use these indices to create the right kind of impact. I'll give you an example of what we're doing in Brazil. So in Brazil, Gianna is leading the whole May effort with Pedro. And what we're doing with May is we are working with this entire collection of Brazilian industry and trying to use the Global Innovation Index to come up with an action agenda for change that the industry can sometimes do themselves. And in some cases, the industry has to work with the government to actually get the changes done. So it gives people a framework for thinking about change. And I think that's very important because ultimately we have to progress through action. So my final word really is action is what matters. The metrics hopefully will help. And congratulations also on your conference, Moacir, because these kind of conferences also bring these two sides together, academia and business, which is very important for action.
Thank you, Soumitra. Jacques.
Well, it's like in the business world. I mean, the balance sheet is a picture of what is happening, but this doesn't mean that the balance sheet will be the only truth. I mean, the truth will be who are the women and men that direct an institution, a company, which are the priority, the strategy, the leadership, the monitoring. And as it was said, rankings are not a verdict. We shouldn't see a ranking as the judgment of the past. Ranking are a way through the metrics, through the indicators, to improve our self-knowledge of our institution, of our business, our small business, to build a better future. So very much so, as it was said, when we see a ranking, we end taking into account what is in the newspaper, what is in the media, the day that this ranking was announced. But this is the least important. The most important is for the leaders that want to make a difference, is to understand what is behind the ranking. What are the dimensions that were selected? Why we were evaluated in such a way and the other way? And then decide for ourselves which are the metrics and indicators that we would like to use to build our own future. And then maybe later on, we will appear better in the picture of that ranking that is done in a global way. But if we look at the ranking like a verdict, I think then we will lose our energy, and this will not help us. Because ranking, as also it was said, to be in the classification, it doesn't depend only on you. If others are doing better, then you will go down. And if others are doing worse, then you will go up, even if you don't do anything. So avoid seeing ranking as a way to evaluate your performance. See ranking as an international comparison, as a way to compare yourself with benchmarking. Select the benchmarking, select the institution or the country or the community that you would like to get close to. And then, like the U multi-rank, which is a university ranking, that it's not a ranking, it's a way to compare yourself to other institutions. This is how you can use in a very fruitful way the effort that is done by institutions like WIPO and others with regard to innovation.
Thank you, Jacques. I'd like to add a final comment. We are 2 minutes away from the end of the panel. I'd like to thank very much Soumitra. We have learned a lot from your presentation. Soumitra, I think what I learned from you today is that Brazil is a rich country, but a very unequal country. So if you can use the Global Innovation Index to move from a commodity-based economy for a knowledge and technology-intensive company, country, this will be very, very important for the Brazilian society. And thank you very much for this insight. And I'd like to thank you very much, Professor Jacques Marcovitch. We are very worried about the impact of universities in the society. And Jacques is saying that we have to use these metrics, the university rankings, to look after what we want to do, what we want to say, and what we want to mean for the society, mainly for a public university like the University of São Paulo. How can we impact and do more than we do already do? So I think this index is much more than just numbers, but is about the directions on how to achieve our strategic objectives as a country and as a university. And I'd like to thank you very much for this insightful panel. I think it was very useful for everyone. Jacques, for you, you finish.
Just to thank you and to wish to Soumitra all the best for him in all his endeavors, but also for his family and his daughter in this new moment that is so meaningful for his family, but also for all of us. I wish you all a lot of health, and let's take these opportunities that the social distance is bringing us together, because the social distance in some way is using technology to bring us together. So let's take these opportunities to build a better future. Thank you so much, Moacir, and thank you, Soumitra.
No, thank you very much, Moacir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone, and thank you very much for the panelists, for the audience. See you in the next panel. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.